Welcome back, everyone. So a lot of new announcements from Hasselblad today. We have the brand new X2D II, but we also have a new lens, which is the 35-100E. Now, because there's so much stuff, I'm separating my videos out. This video is going to be about the lens. If you want to see the X2D video and all the new stuff that comes on here, I will put a link up here at the end of this video, show description, etc. You can check that out. But in this video, I want to talk about the new lens. So as I mentioned, this is the 35-100E. So Hasselblad break their lenses out into various series. We have the V series, we have the P series, and then we have the E series. V stands for versatile, P stands for portable, and E stands for exclusive. And what the exclusive series of lenses does is it represents the flagship image quality, the best that Hasselblad is capable of producing. And this lens is certainly up in that echelon. There's only one other E lens at this point. It's the 20-35, which is an ultra wide angle. It came out earlier this year. And I did have a chance to review that, and I found it exceptional. However, I am not a big wide-angle shooter. When you need it, but I just don't use that day to day. The 35-100, though, however, is in the range that I like to use, and this lens is absolutely outstanding. So this is essentially a 3x lens, so that means it covers a telephoto range from 35 to 100. 35mm equivalents would be about a 27 to 76-ish equivalent. One thing to note here is that I do this on the primes to extend some of the flexibility that I get out of them, but with the Hasselblad, you've got all the crop modes on it, and one of the ones I like to use in addition to the X-band is there's a crop mode which will crop into the sensor to what a 35mm sensor would be. So in that case, this would be an actual 35 to 100mm lens. It's great if you need a little bit of extra reach. You still get a very large file at 66 or so megapixels, and it's a really nice option for if you want to use that. But I find that 35 to 100 covers all my kind of street angles all the way up to a really good portrait length. Now, one thing you've probably already noticed about this lens is it is not the most compact design, but we are talking about medium format and a range of 35 to 100 millimeters, so it is a very versatile lens. But I do want to say, and I know this is hard to pick up from a video, this lens is very lightweight. It comes in at 894 grams, but what I really like about this is when paired with the camera, which is actually lighter than the X2D by a little bit, it is very well balanced in your hand, and I could easily carry this around all day without it being too big of a deal. I think the only situation that it wouldn't cover it in is something where you want to be a little more discreet, and it is a pretty big lens. But if that is not a concern, I mean, you're looking at a focal range where if you take all the prime lenses that Hasselblad offer from 38 all the way up to 90, this actually extends that a little bit. And I'll give you an example. Last year, I had the X2D with me when I went to Japan, and we had days where there was a lot of walking. Now, one of the biggest concerns on that is how much stuff you have with you, because you're going to have to carry it, and you're also going to have to change lenses if you want something different on the camera. And when I was in Japan, I narrowed it down essentially to two lenses. I mainly was using the 38V and the 75P. I did bring along the 90V as well, and I just ended up using the 75P more because it was close enough to a portrait length, and it was just a much lighter lens. Now, I could easily carry one lens around in that situation because it's not too heavy, and I could use that in that type of setting. Now, I don't think it replaces the prime lenses. They're still brighter apertures, but it does offer a really interesting alternative to that. And another thing I want to add is that I mentioned there was only one other E-series lenses, but Hasselblad stated in their press release that this is actually the second lens in what they're referring to as the holy trinity of Hasselblad lenses. So you can put two and two together and say that there's another lens coming, but this is the one that I've been waiting on because it's the one I would definitely use the most. It's a lot lighter than the previous zoom lens that Hasselblad had, which was a 35 to 75. So it's lighter, it's quieter, it's smaller, and it covers a wider range, and the optics on here are exceptional. Now, another thing worth noting here is the 35-100E is a variable aperture lens. So at its widest focal length, at 35, it's going to be an f2.8, which is pretty good for a zoom lens. It does vary though, and by the time you're out to 100, it's going to be an f4. Now, there are two things at play here that I want to talk about. First of all, this is medium format, so the depth of field will be perceived to be much more shallow than it would be on 35mm. So you still get a wonderful bokeh as a portrait lens. You can see in my examples, nice fall off, really beautiful. It really is exceptional. And then the points of focus are exceptionally sharp with very high resolution. Now, in terms of light transmission, obviously f4 is going to always be f4. But if you're in a darker situation, I will argue that with 10 stops of image stabilization on here, as long as your subject's not moving too quickly, you can easily handhold this and get the same performance that you would out of, let's say, a 2.5 lens. It's really impressive. Now, in terms of autofocus speed, this is important with the lens. When you think of an autofocus system on any camera, there are several components involved. First of all, you have to have the software that's going to support things like object recognition. It's going to control accuracy. You have to have the hardware in the body that's going to be able to process and drive that. And then the third component on that is the lens. This is one of the faster focusing lenses out of Hasselblad's entire lineup. It's really impressive on that end. And I also need to mention the shutter, because with the Hasselblad system, it's a leaf shutter system. That means every lens has a shutter inside. The advantage to putting the shutter inside and having a leaf style shutter is that you can get flash sync speeds on any speed that you set it to. This one actually goes to 1/4000th of a second, so I can flash sync all the way up to 1/4000th of a second. The thing though, and if you've used Hasselblad cameras before, you know this, that the shutter being inside the lens does have an acoustic quality to it, and you end up getting a noise. This one is just about silent. In fact, it is really impressive. When I was shooting my friend Alexandra, who's a ballet dancer that I know, we were doing some modeling stuff with her, and she actually made a comment to me at one point during the session, and we did have a little bit of music playing, but she said, you know, this is so weird working with you with this camera. She said, because when I'm working with a photographer, I'm used to listening for the shutter to click, and then I'll change my position. She said, I can't hear your shutter going off at all. So she did a great job, but I thought that was a really interesting comment from somebody who's not a photographer, but it really is silent. And for me as a photographer, that is a big deal, because if you're in a sensitive situation where you don't want to be heard, the only other alternative on Hasselblad before is to move over to the electronic shutter, which is not ideal. It can be done, but it's not ideal. It is completely silent. But now that we have the acoustics worked out in here, some of the other lenses are really good at this too, but this is the best. So spec-wise on this lens, we are looking at a very modern design. There are 16 elements in 13 groups. There's 3 spherical elements. We've got 5 extra low dispersion elements. The filter diameter is 86 millimeters, so this is a big lens, but the weight, as I mentioned earlier, is only 894 grams, so it's extremely well balanced, and although it's large, it is very lightweight and very portable in that sense. Minimum focus distance is very good at 0.4 on the wide end and 0.5 when you're out at 100 millimeters. And so while this is definitely not a macro lens, it will give you close-up reproduction. Okay, so it's one thing to sit here and talk about a lens. It's another to look at some images, and I have a couple examples where I want to show you what kind of image quality you can expect out of this. So first of all, when you're at the wide end, we are capable at 35 millimeters of getting f2.8. Traditionally, lenses, particularly zoom lenses, one of the challenges is getting edge-to-edge sharpness when it's wide open. When a lens is wide open, it's at its most vulnerable. But this is a modern lens design, and they have clearly gotten this. So at f2.8, it is edge-to-edge sharpness. You get a ton of detail. It looks really good. Now, I also want to talk about the long end of this at 100 megapixels. And if we take an example of a portrait such as this, now, as I mentioned earlier, we are talking about medium format. So when I go in, you can see her eyes are razor sharp. We got a ton of detail. And as I go back out, you're going to notice that there is a nice fall off, because f4 on a medium format camera is not going to be the same equivalent as f4 on a 35 millimeter camera. You're going to get a much shallower depth of field, considering we are at f4. Now, another example that I want to show you, and this is mainly a testament to how well the autofocus performs on the X2D II, but in this example, I was using object recognition. I had IAF on for humans, and this is my friend Alexandra. She's a ballet dancer, and she brought over this big flowy dress, and we were experimenting with trying to capture some motion and some texture with that. And so she was flipping this thing around, and you can see that it stayed locked on her eye even as her dress went between her and the camera. And when I go in, it's tack sharp. When I come out, you can see that we've got this in the foreground. So this gives you kind of an example of how well the autofocus performs. And finally, one other example that I wanted to show you. So another thing we were experimenting with doing is using this lens and this camera system with this 10-stop image stabilization to be able to incorporate motion blur into the shot, because it's something I like to do with dance images quite a bit. So in this image, you can see, again, if I go into the face, tack sharp, everything looks great. And then we have this motion blur that's happening in the dress over here. So this is a combination of a couple things. First of all, the autofocus being really good, but also that 10-stop image stabilization and being able to handhold the camera and be able to incorporate motion into the shot. And we ended up getting some stuff that was really cool. All right, so my initial thoughts on the 35-100, first of all, I do love it, as I mentioned. And I think combined with the X2D II, it opens up some new techniques that were unavailable before. But beyond that, just general performance is so much better. Now, as much as I love the X2D, we're talking about single point autofocus only and AFS only. So there was no continuous tracking, nothing like that. There were some limitations. I was able to work around them. They required skills from me as a photographer to be able to understand and anticipate things, but they were more difficult to use. And what we've got here is not only correction of those, but when you combine this with the 10-stop image stabilization, I mean, this is noticeably better, and there's a lot you can do with this system, and I'm really looking forward to using this lens a lot more. It is awesome. One other thing that I want to add about the 35-100E, so one of the questions that I get asked the most on this channel, people will leave it in comments, they'll say, well, hey, if you could only get one lens to go with the X2D, or probably now the X2D II, what would that be? And the only one lens question leads me to more questions because, like, well, do you like to shoot wide angle? Are you a street photographer? Do you do portraits? Like, what do you shoot? The other thing are size requirements. Can you go with a bigger lens, or does it have to be portable? And I can finally say with the 35-100 that if there was only one lens that I was going to own to go with this system, this would be it. It is big, and that is the only complaint that I have about it. It has to be big because, you know, physics. But the fact that they've got the weight reduced to what it is just amazing. The performance on the lens, both optically and physically, is exceptional. Optics are wonderful. It's fast. It's quiet. This is the lens I would recommend now if you're only going to go with one because it covers such a wide focal range and the image quality is awesome. I would love to know what you guys think, though, so leave a comment below. I'll catch you in the next video. Until then, later.